Hello and welcome to Illuminated Movement Astrology. I'm Nikki here to talk to you today about the full moon in Aquarius. So for those of you who've been following me for a while, I'm sorry I haven't been as consistent on this channel. What a wild year this has been. I knew 2024 would be a wild year, but it's also unpredictable. So I apologize for not filming videos as consistently, but I will get back on that starting with today with this full moon. So full moon in Aquarius happening at 27 degrees. And it just happened actually. So we're looking at August the 19th, happened at 11:25 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So adjust for your time zone. What I want to look at today is not just this full moon, but also how the moon fits into the bigger context. Specifically, what is it bringing us attention to, awareness around events that started in 2020? I know, going back to 2020, but there's a lot here that I think is important to take a look at. Again, not just looking at, oh, it's a full moon, and so therefore only this is happening, but to look at things in context. So we'll look at that first, and then we'll compare this chart to the great conjunction that happened between Jupiter and Saturn at 0 Aquarius all the way back in 2020. So without further ado, let's pop up the chart and talk about it. Okay, so the first thing that really jumps out about this full moon, and for those of you who are still learning astrology, which is a lot of my followers, the full moon is when the sun, right up here at the top in Leo at 27 degrees, is opposite the moon. Okay, so if you were able to see this in the evening, you would notice as the sun is setting on one side of the sky, the moon is coming up on the opposite point. So if you look one direction, you'll see the sun set. As you turn the other direction, you'll see the moon rise. And so that's what happens when we've got this full moon energy. So the sun and the moon, the two luminaries of the sky, bringing to us a full reflection of things that have come before. So this energy would have started on a new moon earlier this month. But again, we're also going to look at how this energy has been playing out for quite some time. So we've got that beautiful Aquarius moon, right? That beautiful Leo sun. And when we look at a full moon in Aquarius, we're looking at the fullness in a sense of identity, of who we identify with or how we identify with other people. Where do we shine in groups? How do we contribute to the whole? What are our ideas? What are we doing creatively? How are these things being actualized? There may be for some of us a call to be more in a leadership or a giving position, because remember, when Leo is being very skillful in its expression, Leo is incredibly generous. The sun is naturally at its home base in Leo, the sun constantly giving of itself, right? In our part of the entire universe, we have the sun as our center. And so that's where we can get some of this Leo being self-centered energy. And that's not necessarily bad, because even if you don't have any planets in Leo, you have Leo somewhere on your chart. And so there's something here that's asking you to get in touch with who you are, where you are, but also what are you giving, right? The sun is giving of its light all the time. And when Leo is being unskillful, Leo wants to grab all that light for themselves, right? I don't want to share. It's just all about me and no one else, right? They rob others of their time in the sun, so to speak. So taking a look at, how that could be happening in your life, is that being balanced out when we're talking about an opposition, right? 180 degrees, which would happen on this full moon here, with other people. How are you balancing your creative self-actualization? How are you sharing it? Are you sharing it? Are you not sharing it? Who's your tribe? Who are your people? Who can you give to? Right? Remember, it's not all about taking for self. It's about giving back as well and making sure that they're the right people. And something with Aquarius and also with Uranus that I think is very important to continually point out is the difference between someone looking at you like you're a genius and, oh my gosh, wow, what you just said or did was amazing, and a person looking at you like right? Sideways, like, are you nuts? What's wrong with you? Ew, go away. You know, all those kinds of things can kind of play out in both Leo and Aquarius, but especially in Aquarius. It's where Aquarius can kind of get some of that outsiderness, right? They stand outside of the group. And when we're talking about Aquarius, that can be a beautiful thing because Aquarius is so visionary, right? Their part of their job is to stand outside the group and observe what's happening. Do they want to interact, right? Is this the right group to interact with? Is this the right platform? Is this the right job, relationship, location you're living? Whatever that is for you, is it one that's truly making you feel nourished, right? That's the moon. Moon is what nourishes us, what makes us feel fulfilled. But also, you know, are you able to get in touch with yourself, right? That's the sun. The sun also represents like, where are we shining light? So if you happen to have been born around this full moon, then you'll really be feeling these effects. If not today, then over the next 6 months. Because remember, astrology is not like a light switch that you turn on and turn off. It's more like a dimmer switch. The lights go up, right, to their maximum and then they come back down. So Aquarius really wanting us to get in touch with, you know, our mental side. How are we thinking about things? The challenge here with both Leo and Aquarius is thinking that they're right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through, because there's a lot of emphasis here on what we think we know, what we think we believe. For some people, you know, they could use the term the ego, right? Ego is not necessarily a bad thing. We need an ego. That's part of why we're incarnated. That's part of why we're here. So it's what keeps us tethered to this earth in some way. And that can be a really beautiful thing. So it's when the ego, you know, gets completely out of control again and doesn't consider others, that we can have a problem, even if it's false. There's so many fake gurus, fake, you know, spiritual people right now, which just happens to do a lot with this Neptune as well at 29 degrees, which we'll talk about. But really, when I hear people say, oh, I just have no ego, I'm just selfless. Are you? I don't know about that. So when we're looking at this, two things that really, really stand out. Well, actually, there's three, but two that are particularly bold would be this opposition, right? So that's that red line down here in square to Uranus. So this full moon at 27 degrees, yes, I will talk about Mercury, just hang on a second, is in exact square here to Uranus in Taurus at 27 degrees. So let's talk about Uranus a little bit. Uranus, my favorite description of Uranus is the one that Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about. In fact, he has a book with this title, is Freedom from the Known. And that's part of where we get the liberation aspect of Uranus, breaking us free from what is familiar. Now, that is a beautiful energy. We need that. It's always interesting to me that Uranus is attached to the fixed energy of Aquarius when it got assigned there. But it does make sense because Uranus is also, in a sense, like a lightning rod. It sees things differently. It's connected to what we call higher mind, right? The lower mind. And this is not a dichotomy of one is better than the other. This has more to do with where ideas are coming from. Uranus has to do with ideas, breakthroughs, revelations that come from, in a sense, whatever you call God or the universe or the field or the higher mind. It's coming from somewhere out and being downloaded in. Whereas we talk about the lower mind, we're talking about Gemini there. We're talking about Mercury. We're talking about Virgo, but mostly we're talking about the planet Mercury. We're talking about things that are right in front of us, the little pieces that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, knowledge that comes from, you know, facts and literature and learning, not necessarily these aha moments that just, boom, they drop in. So I hope that makes sense. There's a little distinction there. The thing with Uranus is it's one of the planets that's gotten, I think, so misunderstood. The things that you hear most often about Uranus are it's shocking, it's unpredictable, it's you know, sudden changes, and that can be exciting if those are words that, you know, speak to you and that make you feel like, yeah, they make you feel pumped and energized. And that can also, in a sense, be frightening, right? Like the rug's just going to get pulled out from underneath you and like, whoa, you know, what do we have to deal with now? And so that energy, when it's talked about in that way, not that it's wrong, but it's not the whole picture with Uranus. Uranus, yes, does have things that seem to show up from outside in. It can be things that seem like surprises. It can be things that are, in a sense, reversals of fortune. Like if we think of the wheel of fortune in the tarot, how it's always turning, right? Things will be up, things will be down. That's just life, right? Tied in, tied out. Sometimes it's daytime, sometimes it's nighttime. And Uranus has a lot to do with that as well. So when we're talking about Uranus and when we're talking about things that are coming up that seem like they're coming from out of nowhere, the interesting piece with Uranus is it doesn't come from nowhere. And I'll say that again. It's, yes, it can seem very surprising. Yes, it can seem unpredictable. Yes, those things are all true. But what's also true is usually with Uranus, it's like having a pebble in your shoe. Right? There's something in there that's kind of pushing, that's kind of nudging, maybe irritating. Sometimes Uranian energy can be a bit irritating because there's a little bit of friction, because it's pointing out something to us that in the near future is no longer going to be comfortable. Maybe we were really comfortable. We had this little pebble in our shoe. We're like, it's not a big deal. But if you went hiking on a long, 10-mile hike, that pebble is going to be a problem. And so Uranus has this way of showing us where we need to make changes by pointing out things that are uncomfortable, pointing out where we've gotten stagnant, pointing out where we are no longer in growth mode, where we're no longer changing, right, and evolving. So that's when Uranus can really come in and seem quite loud, as it's trying to break us free from what we've gotten stuck in, what we've gotten overly comfortable with, or again, something in the future, because Uranus is more future oriented. It's looking way down the road, right? It's that higher mind that can see way farther out than the human mind, right, can actually conceive of. It's these pictures where we don't understand how all the pieces fit together. But Uranus is part of that energy, that's part of that creator energy, that God energy that does get it, that does see these pictures in a different way than, again, our human mind can really comprehend in the moment. So if something is coming up, ask yourself, did you have little signs about this? Was there a proverbial pebble in your shoe that became a really big problem, and now you got this big blister and it's cut open and it's bleeding, and right now you've got this big thing to deal with? Could you have stopped at a certain point? Was there indicators that you needed to make a change, or that a change was coming a little bit ago? Right? So really kind of think about that. What area of your life, if you're familiar with your chart, you look at the Taurus area of your life, whatever house that Taurus is occupying will give you clues to where changes need to occur. Okay, where they have been occurring. And in Taurus, we also have been looking at a lot of changing values, right? So since 2018, how have your values changed? Taurus has to do with, as a Venus ruled sign, the things that we find valuable, the things that appreciate over time, because Taurus is earth, it's fixed, it's slow. That's no insults to my beautiful Taurus friends out there. It's what Taurus is meant to do. It's meant to sustain things. So that's why it has to do with appreciation, right? It has to do with the talents that we all have. Maybe you're discovering some new things, right? Maybe you thought that you had to be stuck in a certain role in your life. And all this Uranus energy going through Taurus since 2018 is showing you, no, you don't. Especially on this full moon, when it's talking to the moon and, the moon and the sun. When we look at this pattern here, this big red triangle, really helps when I draw red over the red triangle, doesn't it? I should change colors. Sorry about that. It's pointing to Uranus, like the outlet is Uranus. And I've said this in other videos, and I always say this to clients when we're working with a big Uranian energy, is Uranus needs an outlet. Get that pebble out of your shoe, right? If you were going to steam something, if you've ever boiled something, right, with a pressure cooker, you have to have an escape. You have to have somewhere for that energy to go. Otherwise, the lid's going to blow off the top, right? And that's when Uranus becomes, in a sense, problematic in our life. And we think, ugh, gross, Uranus, like, ugh, I hate this energy. It's always just coming in and crashing the party, right? Maybe, maybe not. So take a look at where in your life do you need some relief? Do you need to release some pressure? Where are there changes? Taurus is not the biggest fan of changes unless they get to pick, right? Taurus likes comfort and security. Where are there changes that you're, in a sense, avoiding, right? Take a look at that, because with this Leo energy, with this Aquarius energy, it's something to do with, maybe in a sense, where you've been stuck in what you think should be happening, what you think is supposed to occur, or what life is supposed to look like, or who you're supposed to be. There's something in here around, we've all gone, well, I shouldn't say we've all, but most of us has gone through tremendous changes over the past 4 years, 6 years and beyond. Do these things still fit for you? This is a wonderful opportunity to check in and say, where do I want to go? Maybe what do I want to be freed from? What do I want to be liberated from? If I got to choose, what would that be? And really start working on taking action towards those things. Also look at where you may be really rigid or stuck, again, in your beliefs. So if we're talking about Aquarius, we're talking about what you think you know, because Aquarius has to do with mind. It has to do with, again, maybe the groups that we've been interacting with or hanging out with. Maybe they're really not a good fit for who we are anymore. Maybe we're not being able to have that Leo energy of feeling special, feeling like we can be generous with who we are and what we have to give. So if that's the case, making some changes there. The other big energy here on this chart has to do with this second T-square. So a T-square is when we get this big right angle. And let me change colors here. I'm sorry I didn't do that earlier. Let's pick green. That should stand out. So we've got this second T-square. So that's an opposition, which is happening between Venus and Saturn over here at 17 degrees. Okay, and these mutable signs, 17 and 18 degrees here. And Saturn square to Jupiter. So this is a big, big, big one. Why is this a big, big, big one? Well, this is the energy that has to do with 2020, the Great Conjunction, when Jupiter and Saturn came together at 0 degrees Aquarius. And I'll show that chart in a moment. But what we're looking at here is we have that opposition, and then we have this square pointing to not just Jupiter, but also Mars in Gemini. So when we have T-square energy, we have these two planets on either end, right? The long end, the opposition end. In this case, it would be the Venus and the Saturn. They're opposite one another. So they're making some energy where they're kind of being pulled like a seesaw back and forth. But then we have this fulcrum point. We have this third point. In this case, it's Jupiter and Mars up at the top. And that's where all the energy is being funneled, because square energy has to do with butting up against something, right? This is a dynamic energy. It's a very alive energy. It can be a challenging or frustrating energy as well. But I'll use this example, and I've used this before, is, for example, if you're a seedling, you have to break out, right, of your seed case to turn into a plant, whatever you're going to be. You have to push up against the soil as well. And so if you didn't push up against a challenge, a different viewpoint, something that maybe felt like it was creating a ceiling for you, you wouldn't sprout up, you wouldn't grow. So T-squares have a lot of energy to them. Both of these T-squares are pulling in a tremendous amount of energy towards both that Uranus, but now we're also talking about that Jupiter and Mars. So Jupiter, the planet of, right, expansion. Expanding what? Anything it comes in contact with, right? Wanting to, Mercury asks the questions, Gemini asks the questions of like, what's in front of me? What do I need to know right here, right now? What's this, if I took apart this computer, right? What would be the parts? How would it work? Jupiter asks the bigger questions like, well, where does the computer fit in terms of the cosmos, right? And then you could even take this into how does AI fit into what we're doing in this computer sense, right? Is it sentient? Should we be playing with it or not? Jupiter asks those big, in a sense, existential kinds of questions, right? That's also why it has to do with religion and things of that nature. So when Jupiter is in Gemini, Jupiter is in its opposite position. Again, Gemini is about things that are right in front of it, the people that are right in the neighborhood, right? The facts, learning, things that are right here that we can just kind of have a container for. And Jupiter wants to kind of, right, bust that out. So if you think about the old Disney animated movie, Alice in Wonderland, when Alice, I don't remember if she drinks a potion or eats the wafer, but anyway, she's in the rabbit's house and she gets big, right? And her arms and her legs and everything are busting out the windows and the doors. That's kind of Jupiter and Gemini, right? Where is it going to go? The house is only so big. And so Jupiter here can get a little bit frustrated, especially with this Mars energy of, I want things to already be bigger. I want the big ideas. I want the more friends or the more knowledge or the relationship or whatever it is that you're striving towards in the Gemini area of your chart, and kind of getting bogged down with a bunch of little details. Or maybe you're meeting a lot of people, right? Because Gemini also has to do with people, but like no one's really clicking. So there can kind of be this sense of sometimes spinning wheels. Be open to it, right? Be that mutable energy that has to do with things changing. Allow the flow to come in, because at some point there will be a piece of information, there will be a job offer, there will be a new friend or relationship or opportunity. Something there will change and will be brought into you. Okay, you might just have to do a lot of sifting and sorting, and that's a really great thing for Gemini to be able to do, is to, in a sense, look at some things and go, okay, I can hold both of these things. Which one do I want to pick? Right? Maybe it's both. And maybe that's true for a while. Maybe we really need that. Right? Especially when we're looking at Jupiter has to do also with what do we believe? Maybe we need to believe in things that are dissonant, right? Maybe we really need that juxtaposition right now that Gemini can be so great at. And that's also why Gemini can seem so self-contradictory, right? It's because it's this and that are true. And when we look at that square to Saturn, right? Saturn in Pisces, another planet that's in a sign that it's not really super adept at, we'll say. Why? Well, Saturn likes things concrete. It wants to put one foot in front of the other. It's things that take a long time. It's very serious, right? It can feel restricting, where Jupiter's like, let's bust out through the house, right? Alice busting all out through the house. Well, Saturn's literally the opposite. It's going to pull Alice back in so that she actually fits inside the house. And those two energies, Jupiter and Saturn, are very antithetical to one another, right? One wants to be big, one wants to kind of take it in and hone, right? Jupiter doesn't care what it expands, it just wants more, right? And Saturn's like, oh, do we really need that? Maybe we should just pick this like one thing over here and really work on honing that skill, right? Because Saturn ultimately wants us to move towards greatness and towards mastery at great cost over great time. So when Saturn's sitting in Pisces, when we think about Pisces, right, beautiful, sensitive Pisces, again, that's kind of has this a little bit more ethereal quality, is also asking the big questions because it's a Jupiter ruled sign. Jupiter and Neptune are the two planets that are in charge of Pisces. It's looking at, the end and the beginning. It's very giving. It's very can be very self-sacrificing. It can really pull in energy from, again, like that Uranian kind of energy from way out, the muse, God, the creator, whatever it is that resonates for you. It's part of why when we look at charts, for example, great musicians, often they can have things that are, a lot of things are in Pisces, for example, because they're able to go beyond the material self right? Which would be Saturn. Saturn is the material. It's things that are materialized, that have crystallized into form. Pisces wants to go beyond that. What's beyond form? Right? Music, where does it come from? It's not just the structure, right? There's something beyond that. When we look at movies, photography, theater, all these kinds of things that can also be Piscean, there's something beyond, there's something otherworldly that can, doesn't mean it's going to, it's not a guarantee, but it can come in and really, really take us. That's why, I'll go back to the music example, music can really transport us, right, to another place, to another time, to an emotional realm, those kinds of things. So we have all of that, and then we have Saturn that's like trying to crystallize that, trying to get those things materialized, but in a sense, having a bit of a tug of war here because it's trying to materialize the immaterial. There's a dissolving quality to Pisces. That's why Pisces represents things that are boundless, right? There is no separation between me and you and plants and animals and all of these things, right? We're all made of star stuff. We're all made of subatomic particles, all those kinds of things. Pisces kind of gets that intuitively. That's another great Pisces word. So we have Saturn here trying to, in a sense, give us the opportunity to say, okay, all of these old things are falling away. Pisces, right? They're ending. Pisces has to do with endings, right? Things start over again in Aries. So what is ending in your life? What is dissolving? What's no longer working? What's not helping you tap into the greater, force that is beyond just you and your material plane? Can you tap into that? It may feel like you're blocked from doing that. It may feel like you can't really get in touch with that inspiration, possibly with Saturn there. Sometimes Saturn can limit or restrict things in a way that we're like, wow, why am I not really able to meditate right now? Or why am I not really able to do this? Just keep going. With Saturn, keep putting one foot in front of the other, right? If your goal is to, include meditation, let's say, for example, in your life, keep doing it, even if it's hard, even if you keep getting interrupted, right? Even if you can't do it at the same time of day, just keep going, right? Pisces is also has to do with, again, being giving, right? Not to the point where we harm ourselves. And Saturn can be so helpful here because Saturn giving us some boundaries around how much we are giving. And if we look at that full moon, how does that play in with the full moon? Are we giving to the wrong people? That old saying from it's from the Bible, do not cast your pearls before swine, something to that effect. Are you in a place that's not quite right, where you're not being recognized? And that can be okay. Sometimes, we just have to keep going through those areas until something else opens up. Sometimes maybe it's not the right time to really like bust out and shine, even though a lot of social media is making us think the opposite. It's like, oh, it's just all about me. Well, sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have to kind of keep a little lid on that for a while until it's the right timing. Right. So with Saturn here, there could be something about that. Looking at that Jupiter, looking at that Mars, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about the same things? How can you, again, Mars squaring Saturn, Mars wants to go forward, Mars wants to get stuff done, Mars wants to make those connections, right? Mars wants to network, Mars wants to figure stuff out in Gemini and is butting up against Saturn, right? Saturn going, maybe not. Maybe that's not the right connection. Maybe that's not the right offer. Maybe you should think about that a little bit more, right? Also talking to our friend Venus over here. Venus, as we talked about before, kind of having to do with this Uranus, right, which is squaring the full moon. But what do we value now? What is it now? What are the little things, right? We're talking about Virgo. What are the little things day to day that you may be not appreciating? You may really want to be busting into, right? This Jupiter energy, this Sun and Leo energy. It's like, go, 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 right? Uranus, let me just get the heck out of here and break through this yucky kind of constriction that I might feel, or the confusion that I might feel, because I feel a change coming, but I don't really know what it is. And where do I go? And everything feels a little crazy. looking at Venus, what can you appreciate? What can you value in Virgo? The little things, the little pieces day to day that you already have access to. Okay, this is a key here. We're looking at some of these energies of Gemini. This is stuff that's local, stuff that's familiar. Virgo, the little things about yourself, right? Your health, maybe the things that you need to, the daily rituals that you need to be engaging in. Are you valuing those? Are you putting some emphasis on those? With Saturn and Pisces here, how can you keep going? How can you keep going? How can you still be generous of spirit? How can you keep the faith, really, that if you keep going and if you keep trusting, that something at some point will work out? And that can be really hard right now. There is so much going on in the world, so much falling apart. The revolution always sounds exciting, and it is exciting, but living through it is challenging, right? It's not easy to live through what we are living through right now in 2024. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that are crumbling down. And it's really hard to sometimes in those spaces remember the little things, right? What can you be grateful for? Leo, what can you share? Right? Aquarius, with who? Right? What changes do you need to make in the Taurus area? Right? How can you find maybe some new ways of learning or thinking, or what new people potentially can you work with that might think differently from you, that might believe differently from you? How can you value also those interactions that are challenging, that are uncomfortable? Right? These T-squares are uncomfortable. There's a lot of energy pushing up against each other right now. So on this full moon, what in your life is going well? Because there has to be something, right? There has to be at least something. What's maybe not? And how can you cultivate, again, a gracious way of being, of appreciating? Maybe it's the people in your life. Maybe it's just appreciating, one small thing can make such a difference to our mindset. Because I haven't even talked about Mercury yet, but if we look at the planet that's in charge of this Venus here, right? If we look at the planet that would be in charge of Jupiter and Mars here, it would be Mercury. Mercury in retrograde, sitting right next to the sun. So when Mercury is right next to the sun, it's 1 degree away, right? The sun is, in a sense, overshining, right? It's kind of blasting out the energy of Mercury. So Mercury can't really work in its normal fashion. It may not be able to see or to make the connections that you're expecting, that you're wanting, that you're desiring to have made, right? That would make you feel emotionally more comfortable, right? With this moon, this full moon. You may not be able to see how this all connects yet, especially with Mercury in retrograde, right? We're going back and we're reviewing things. So again, take stock. What do you have already? What have you been working on or working towards? What is the energy that you were hoping maybe has been coming up, maybe a recurring theme to have actualized since 2020? Right? What's going on here? So this may take some more patience. That's a lovely Saturn word here, patience, right? To get to that point. There are things that are not being revealed, and whatever you think was supposed to be concretized, I'm sorry to tell you right now, that's just may not be on the menu quite yet. There's a lot of uncertainty with this Uranian energy at that square, right, to the full moon. Mercury, again, can't really see what's coming up because we've got this big sun blasting out the energy, and Mercury is going back and having to retrace its steps, which is a good thing. Remember, retrogrades are the opportunity for a do-over and a do better, or a do again. This can be a really good thing, depending on how you look at it. It can also be frustrating, right? Sometimes you don't want to do something over again. It's like, enough. Can we move on? And that could be a lot of the frustration that's also happening here. So be careful with your words, especially with Mars and Gemini sitting right next to Jupiter. It may be really tempting to just, how do I want to say this? I was going to say verbally assault, but that feels maybe a little not the right term in 2024, but kind of that like verbal, just like bleh, like lashing out, like, you know, taking out all your frustrations maybe on, you know, your partner or someone at work or, you know, the person that cut you off in traffic, right? Just see if you can give some constructive outlets somewhere else in your life. Like maybe you need to write actually a really angry letter, or maybe you need to write something in that way for yourself just to get it out, right? But not at the cost of injuring someone else just because you feel frustrated because you can't go forward with where you are. Because as much as this full moon, yes, is about illumination, it's like a delayed illumination. We can't really see it. And with all the big energy that's pulling us apart, with all the things that are falling down and how uncertain everything already feels, we can really want that certainty, but it's just not quite necessarily here yet. So what can you keep working on? What can you keep appreciating? What can you keep going forward with so that you're able to really creatively self-actualize that Leo part of your chart with the right people in that Aquarius part of your chart, right? With the things, the people, the places, the lessons, the daily rituals that you can appreciate, keep going, keep building things, even though it feels like, you know, like Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill, right? Only to have it fall down. Just keep doing it. At some point, you'll figure out how to get that boulder up, right? And what areas do you need to make changes? What do you need to pay attention to in that Taurus part of your chart? Okay. It's a lot of energy. This is a complex, very complex full moon. So let me clear that stuff out. The last thing I want to talk about, well, I guess the last two things I want to talk about on this chart, because we could talk about everything, but one is this Pluto. And this will become more important when I show you the chart from 2020, for those of you who are not familiar with the chart from that time period. So Pluto, 0 degrees in retrograde in Aquarius. So why does that matter? Well, Pluto is coming back and it's hitting the point where Jupiter and Saturn were, okay, at the Great Conjunction in December of 2020. So we have Jupiter and Saturn square to one another, okay? So they're already in this dynamic energy. We've got Pluto retracing its steps, right? And what does Pluto do? Pluto magnifies things. Pluto pulls stuff up that, you know, if we were talking about Carl Jung, one of the great psychotherapists of the 20th century, the shadow work, right? What's being pulled out from the shadows? What do we need to face that may be in the underbelly, in the underworld? Maybe that's been buried beneath the surface. What is it that needs to come up? Not only now, not only going forward as it goes, well, it's going to go back into Capricorn just a bit before it goes forward again into Aquarius for the next, what we got left, like 19-ish years. What last things do we need to take a look at? And how does this relate to the year 2020, December? What came up then for you? Because it has to do with this Jupiter and Saturn square. When Jupiter and Saturn meet, then they move around. Jupiter is the faster moving planet, so Jupiter is going to go first. It's pulling up this energy saying, okay, they met 0 Aquarius, right? This point, which also kicked off a whole new era. I've talked about this in other videos. But now, what adjustments need to be made to what happened? Not only in terms of Jupiter and Saturn having to do with where we fit into the collective energy and the collective society energy itself, but also with Pluto here. What maybe do we not want to look at? What do we not want to face? What do we not want to see? It can be even more challenging because we've got this, it's a week in conjunction here, a weak quincunx, say that 5 times fast, with the sun and Neptune. So everyone that's alive right now has this Neptune and Pluto energy in sextile. They're amplifying one another. They're really supporting one another, changing the collective energy. especially at the beginning and in degrees here. These are big changes of things that are inevitable, really. And these aren't just little things like we're changing our hair color. This is big. This is big stuff. And we can see that out in the world. And I'm just saying that here again, not to scare you, but to remind you that this is part of what's happening. Okay. Things do need to change, whether that makes you excited or scared or both, right? I'm usually on the kind of the both end of that spectrum. It's like, oh, this is so amazing. Oh my gosh, this is so awful, right? So having that quincunx energy, it may be hard to see what exactly it is maybe in ourself, right, that needs to change. But it is important looking into. So especially go back to wherever zero Aquarius falls in your own personal chart and think back to the end of 2020, if you can, right? It seems like so long ago, and yet it seems like yesterday. It's strange. But what was going on then? Because Pluto's going to magnify, it's going to pull up whatever you were kind of focusing on there, whatever was shifting there, whatever was coming up there is getting a big, big, big hit from this full moon, like huge. And this is a challenging thing because we're being asked to make adjustments with that square. And we may not know exactly what they are yet, especially because Jupiter and Saturn are in signs that they're not really fully comfortable with, right? They have to work differently. They have to stretch themselves a little bit more. And so in those areas of your chart as well, there's something that you may have to stretch yourself with a little bit more. You may have to give a little bit more patience to. You may have to give a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, however many times, revisit, look at. You're going to have to be flexible because there's something here that says, well, we had this idea, but if you've ever launched a project off the ground, there is something that you're going to have to go back and fix or change or redo, or maybe, if you're working with a team, it's like someone on the team has to go or bring someone else in to help you. There's something here that needs a shift, that needs an adjustment, that needs a change. And again, it goes back to 2020. So to show you what I mean there, let's pull up. Actually, let me just look at this one chart really quick. So, okay, so here's the 2020 chart. Okay, so we're looking at December 21st, 2020, the Great Conjunction. So what the heck is the Great Conjunction that I have been going on about? It is Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. I talked about this quite a bit in my Pluto and Aquarius video. I think it's the first one I did. So if you go look through the Pluto and Aquarius playlist, you'll find it. Why was this significant? Well, briefly, Jupiter and Saturn are considered the social planets. So planets that have to do with society, our society's beliefs, right? The laws, the governance, the things that we think, right? Culturally, gender-wise, whatever that happens to be, religious-wise, laws and things of the sort, and how we materialize them, right? With Saturn, what does that mean? How do we fit into society? What is our job? Saturn has a lot to do with what is our role? What are we here to master and to give back to the world? Okay, and how do we feel about that? What are we believing? What does that look like? So if you go back in time, you'll see about every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn meet up at zero, well, not necessarily 0 degrees, but they meet up in the zodiac together. Okay, remember, conjunct means they're side by side like peanut butter and jelly. Okay, when we're looking at 0 degrees, that is the beginning degree. So we're kicking off the beginning of a new societal focus that will last for another 20 years. That has to do this time with Aquarius focuses, Aquarius type things. Okay, so we would think about, what do you know about Aquarius, right? And apply that. Okay, Saturn, strong here because Saturn is one of the planets that's in charge of Aquarius. So there's a little bit more of like, even though it's Jupiter and Saturn, Saturn's having a little bit more to say in the conversation, right? If they were singing together, you would hear Saturn's voice a little bit louder than maybe you would hear Jupiter. Okay. The other planet in the modern planets that are in charge of Aquarius, that is in charge of Aquarius, is Uranus. So we have to really watch, where are these two planets, because their input, their energy is going to be quite loud in the social collective, in what comes up for us culturally, what's going on in society, and how we interact with that. Okay, whatever way that comes up. What was also significant about this has to do with, prior to that, we had Jupiter and Saturn meeting up, as they do every about 20 years, except they were meeting in Earth signs. So they had this small cycle about every 20 years. Jupiter and Saturn get together like peanut butter and jelly, and they buddy up and they go, okay, what are we going to focus on for the next 20 years? Okay, let's start actualizing that. So if you look at society and you look back about every 20-ish years, you'll start to notice there's quite a significant shift, right? There's quite a significant change. So if we were looking at, this one was 2020, right? Ooh, man, can't write today. So that was 2020. Okay, the one prior to that would have been in the year 2000. And in the year 2000, Jupiter and Saturn happened to be in Taurus. Okay, so when they go around, Jupiter and Saturn spend 200 years in a particular element. So for about 200 years, except for there was one exception, there was about a 6-month exception in 1981 where Jupiter and Saturn met up in Libra. It was late 1980 to 81. So those of you that were born in that little 6-month period, you have Jupiter and Saturn in your chart in Libra. With the exception of that, we had 200 years of Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Earth. So that goes all the way back to the late 1800s, right? And if we think about society, right, from the end of the 1800s to 2020, we can see certain things. So it went through Virgo, right? And it goes around, it was going through Virgo, Capricorn, and Taurus. What did society feel like for a long time? Predictable, right? It was very, in certain cultures, I'll speak for the United States because that's where I live, and I don't want to presuppose for other cultures with whom I don't have a lived experience. But I'll speak for Western culture, for the United States, it was get a job, right? When you asked somebody like, oh, hi, you would meet somebody. It's like, oh, hi, I'm Nikki, I'm an astrologer, right? You kind of identified yourself in some way, whether that was comfortable or not. Not everybody did this, but this was a societal thing, okay? So this doesn't apply to you, but think about society. It was kind of like, what did we do, right? Earth energy, or in a sense, is like the doers, right? It's building energy. It's material energy. And that's not necessarily bad, right? It's food, it's agriculture. Yes, it could be buildings. It's, the service industries, all those kinds of things were getting a lot of energy in society. And when 2020 happened, again, there was a brief 6-month period. There's always like a little preview when it changes, but we had about 200 years of Earth, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. I need to get a pen to write with. So we have the shift in 2020 that not only is at 0 degrees, which is the beginning of something, but we have 200 years of a new element. So for the next 200 years, Jupiter and Saturn, when they meet up, they're going to meet up in Libra again next. So my fellow 1980, 81ers who have Jupiter and Saturn in Libra, it's going to be more comfortable for us now. Okay, because we already had this back in the 80s. And so in a sense, I don't want to say we were ahead of our time, but we were a little bit out of sync with time about how we think about culture and society in some way. There was something there, if you look at the Libra part of your chart, that you were most likely, in a sense, ahead of time, or had ideas that didn't quite fit, that didn't quite jive with what the cultural norms were, with where you grew up or how you were schooled, or what was expected of you in some way. And yes, there are other planets where this could show up, but we're talking about like a cultural shift. So it's going to become more comfortable for those who were born with this energy. But now we're talking about Jupiter and Saturn. They're next going to meet up in Libra, and then Gemini, and so on for 200 years until it moves into water. I don't think I'll be here, even if we get to what all those crazy billionaires want to do, make us live forever. No, thanks. I won't be here in this form, but there we have it. So why is this so important again? Well, Jupiter and Saturn have changed our cultural values, right? Have you noticed? It's the obvious one, but I'm going to use it because it's obvious. So hopefully you understand my point. There is not quite the same emphasis on, let's say, for example, a 9 to 5 job. And that's really changed, right? We're seeing pushback against things like materialism. Again, that may be comfortable for you, that may be not comfortable for you, but we're seeing this as a cultural kind of shift. There's a pushback against that. There's a push into, in a sense, what's your group identity, right? And the things that you think about, your beliefs, how you want the laws, how you want society structured has to do with, right? It's changing a bit for some people. For some people, it isn't, right? They're just going to stay like, it's crystallized. I want it this way. I don't want to change it. But there is at least a conversation around changing things away from stuff that's so material. We're moving more towards valuing things like ideas, conversation, in a sense, people. There's a lot more air moves around, right? That's part of air's job. If we think about like planting seeds, air's got to move it, right? If air never moved, my goodness, what would the planet even be like, right? Would there be clouds? Would there be weather, right? So air is very movable. And another thing that we've seen is large amounts of migration, people moving around, right? Whether they want to change where they live, or that's a state or a country, whether they're changing careers, whether they're changing what they thought, whether they're changing the groups that they've identified with. It's also why we keep hearing so many things like the generational challenges. There's kind of almost this sense of, I don't really like using the term tribalism, but I can't think of something quite better. But it's like this: what tribe do you belong in? Right? Aquarius has to do with groups and group identity in some way, or not identity, right? So you can choose to be on the outside of it. But a lot of that, if you think about what's coming up, those kinds of things are very important and will be all the way till 2040, right? And in 2040, we'll have Jupiter and Saturn will be going into Libra. Okay. So we have a while with this energy. And again, it makes Saturn and Uranus even more prominent because we're talking about Aquarius. So what does this have to do with the full moon? Well, 0 degrees Aquarius. Where is Pluto right now? It's at 0 degrees Aquarius, right? So if we clear this out and we look at the two charts together, okay, so we have that Jupiter and Saturn on the inside with the full moon on the outside. What do you see? Right? Boom, 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 boom. Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, 0 degrees. So what is Pluto transforming, bringing up, magnifying, annihilating? Pluto can really come in and, if we think about Phoenix energy, which is associated with Pluto, the Phoenix has to burst into flames and into ashes. It has to cease to be before it can be reborn. So with Pluto, there's always, in a sense, something that has to be given up, whether or not you want to give it up. Okay, if you participate with it, it's a little bit easier usually. But if you don't participate with it, that's when Pluto can really just feel especially severe. So there is the opportunity for a lot of Phoenix moments, a rebirth in some way in our cultural values, in our social values, in how we fit into society, what we believe, what we think, in terms of how that fits into Aquarius. Now, that can be pretty, that can be ugly, that can be both at once, right? Most likely it's going to be both things at once. So if you look at the Aquarius part of your chart, what is coming up for you? What is Pluto trying to show you? What is Pluto asking you maybe to let go of so that something else can take its place? Okay. Pluto also has to do with buried treasure, right? So if you've ever gone, I've used this example before, but if you've ever gone like gold mining, for example, you have to dig in the dirt. You have to dig and dig and dig until you get to the right layers of the earth. You can't just walk out and be like, oh, giant gold nugget, way, right? It doesn't work that way, okay? So we have to be willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears to dig down to find the buried treasure. That means confronting things we don't want to look at. That means looking at parts of ourselves that maybe we have repressed or suppressed, right? And how we fit into society or not. How do we fit into our groups or not? What ideas do we have about how we're supposed to be, life's supposed to be, other people are supposed to be, right? Take a look at that. Because with that full moon energy, right, with Mercury being in retrograde and right next to, let's see, where's Leo? Over here, right? Right next to the sun, right? We're not quite sure what that is yet. We're not quite sure maybe what those messages are or what we think, right? So we have to be somewhat flexible here. There's a lot of other stuff on this chart, but that was a big one that I really wanted to take a look at. Some of the other things, if we put these two together, again, from 2020, is the inside ring, okay, the smaller one, and then we have the full moon on the outside. If we look at how these planets are lining up, there's some really, really strong conjunction energy. If I would just to look at the conjunctions, the planets that are peanut butter and jelly, right, with this transit, we would have Saturn right on top of Neptune, right? We would have Neptune at its critical degree right on top of the moon, right? We have the North Node in Chiron. Okay, something needs to change, right? In the way we are approaching life, what we think we can have, right? Who we think we are. There's something here that needs to change, and it does have to do also with a masculine type energy. And I don't necessarily mean men, but we are seeing kind of some changes in the masculine identity or archetype. But it also has to do with the masculine energy within us all, right? If we think about inhaling and exhaling, I love thinking about masculine and feminine in that way, that we need both. If we only ever inhaled, right, that wouldn't go very well. If we only ever exhaled, that wouldn't go well, right? We need to balance the two things together. And so right now, part of what's going on in the collective is the need to balance out that energy. Where do we feel like we can't be self-actualized? Where has something happened here in our ability to go for what we want? What's happened with the masculine energy within us all? Again, whatever your gender identification is, that we all have this yin yang, in out, receive, give energy. There's something here that needs some healing, that needs more wisdom. A lot of wisdom can be brought forth, which is incredible. We look at this Chiron Mars, right? We've got North Node, Jupiter, Mars. There's so much here about challenging what we think we know, being open to receiving adjustments, being open to perhaps changing, again, how we are, what we thought we knew, what we thought we were going after, who we're around, things just to pay attention to. Okay, there is a lot of uncertainty. And it's hard right now when there's so much chaos, because there is a lot of chaos going on right now. Chaos is needed. It's just as important as order. But sometimes when we have a lot of chaos, right, we want more certainty. And the opposite can be true. When everything's just blah, blah, day in and day out, we're like, man, can we have some variety, right? Which would be the chaos. So just being open to that flow, being open to what needs to change, what's coming up, not being afraid, right? With Pluto, there can be a lot of fear. Same with Saturn. There can be a lot of fear. Sometimes those are the things that we don't want to look at. And that's where, we tend to think of courage in terms of like Mars, for example, Mars being the planet of courage, or Aries, something in that kind of way, Aries or Scorpio, the Mars ruled signs. But I think it actually takes quite a bit of courage to also do Saturn things, to do the hard things, right? To come up against the challenges, to have the uncomfortable conversations, to push yourself beyond where the limits, right? Sometimes. And to really go down and look at who we are at the core. We all have something, Saturn and Pluto both kind of share this, things that in some way we feel ashamed of, or maybe guilty about, or like there's something like inherently bad or wrong. There's something in there that needs to be looked at. And as with most things, once you bring them up to the surface, right, you shine a light on the monsters under the bed. Oftentimes, when you face it, whether or not that was a pleasant experience, because it's usually not all that pleasant, at least at first, or part of it isn't, you grow and you change and you get braver, right? You get stronger. You get the gold after all the digging. Like that's when it happens. And so I just want to encourage everyone out there who stayed all the way to the end of this video to keep going, to stay appreciative. Remember, we've got that Venus, right? Here, with that full moon. Let me bring back just the full moon for you. But we have this this sense of like we need to remember the little things. We need to not necessarily just be spinning our wheels, right? Trying to force changes to happen. There is an ask of going with the flow and going with changes, even though we have also that fixed T-square, right? We're talking about Uranus. We're talking about liberation from what is known, which is not always comfortable, although it can be the most beautiful experience because ultimately our soul is wanting us, right, to grow and to change and to evolve. This is what we all signed up for in some way, not necessarily maybe the specific things that have occurred for you, but if we can step back, right, that Aquarius, step back and kind of look and have hope that maybe at some point it will all make sense, right? It's where we get the term blessings in disguise. So just remembering that, yes, you matter, but other people do too, right? There's a lot of changes going on. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. We generally want more clarity when things are foggy and vice versa, right? Sometimes when it's too clear, we're like, oh man, can someone just like draw the shades? I don't want so much blindedness. There's a lot here. There's a lot happening in 2024. It's a dynamic year. It's a huge, huge changing year. 2025 will be as well. But remember not to get stuck in the fear of it, right? All of these changes will occur and we can choose to participate in them or not. But usually when we choose to participate, right, it goes a lot better. So I hope that was helpful. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I know that's a lot of information, but there's a lot to talk about. And again, when we just look at something like the sun and the moon, you don't get the full picture, but you've got to really look at the whole chart. And I know we couldn't look at the whole chart because this video would have been like 10 hours long and no one needs to sit through that. You can also hear my voice going, right? So I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some things to at least contemplate or some things to work with, some things to participate in, because for astrology it can really feel like we get stuck in this fatedness of things are happening to us. And that's true to a degree. We're all here with Pluto at 0 Aquarius, with this full moon square Uranus. None of us really gets a choice in that, right? That's happening whether we want it to or not. So we can choose how we show up. We can choose what we want to focus on. We can choose to, be kind when it'd be easier to be rude. We can choose to hold a boundary when it'd be easier to cave. We can do those kinds of things and we can keep doing them. And the chart is alive, we're alive, whether or not you want to, continue to look at astrology in a way where it feels like it's just happening to you, or when you realize, okay, these opportunities are present and how do I want to interact with them? How do I want to really kind of live with them and through them? So I'll be doing some more videos coming up. Again, thank you so much for all of my new watchers, new subscribers, old subscribers. I love you all so much. And I look forward to chatting with you soon. Take care. Mwah. Bye.